In the marble-columned halls of Providence Municipal Court, where justice had been dispensed for generations, the air itself seemed to hold its breath as designer heels clicked against polished floors with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. The gallery sat packed shoulder to shoulder, phones recording, local news cameras, positioned strategically, all awaiting what should have been a routine traffic violation hearing, but had become something far more extraordinary. A woman, draped in clothing worth more than most attendees earned in months, approached the bench with her chin raised, flanked by attorneys in $1,000 suits, their leather briefcases gleaming. Under fluorescent lights, Judge Frank Caprio sat quietly at the bench, his weathered hands folded, dark eyes reflecting decades of wisdom earned through countless cases where he had witnessed humanity at its best and worst. The courtroom, usually filled with nervous murmurs and shuffling papers, had fallen into an eerie silence, broken only by the mechanical hum of recording equipment and the defendant's steady footsteps. She stopped before the judge, her expression carrying the unmistakable certainty of privilege, that invisible armor worn by those who have never faced true consequences. Then she spoke words that would ricochet across the nation, dismissing the charges with a casual wave that seemed to sweep away the very concept of accountability itself. Words that suggested laws were merely suggestions for people of her standing. Judge Caprio's voice cut through the tension like a bell, clear and unhurried, carrying the weight of authority, tempered by compassion. "Before we proceed with any motions or arguments," he said, leaning forward slightly, his glasses catching the light, "I'd like you to state your full name for the record, please." The simple request, delivered with quiet dignity, seemed almost ceremonial in its formality, a reminder that this courtroom operated under principles far older and more sacred than money or influence. The woman's lips curved into a smile that suggested she considered even this a formality beneath her station. "Catherine Ashford Wellington III, she announced, each syllable pronounced with deliberate emphasis, her voice carrying across the silent gallery like a declaration of sovereignty. The surname landed like a thunderclap, Wellington, a name that adorned hospital wings and university buildings, that appeared in Forbes lists and political fundraiser guest roles, that opened doors ordinary citizens didn't even know existed. Gasps rippled through the courtroom like wind through wheat fields. Phones tilted upward for better angles, reporters leaning forward with sudden intensity. Several spectators exchanged knowing glances, recognizing immediately the implications of that powerful family connection. Judge Caprio's expression remained unchanged, a mountain unmoved by the storm, though his eyes registered the gallery's reaction with patient understanding. He wrote the name carefully in his notes, his pen moving with deliberate precision, giving the moment neither more nor less weight than it deserved. The defendant's smile widened slightly, interpreting his calm as intimidation, mistaking judicial temperament for weakness. Catherine's attorney rose with theatrical flourish, his $1,000 suit catching the overhead lights as he approached the bench with papers held high like sacred scrolls. "Your Honor, I'm presenting a motion for immediate dismissal," he declared, his voice dripping with practiced confidence, laying document after document before Judge Caprio, charitable foundation certificates, political endorsement letters, photographs of the Wellington family, alongside presidents and senators. The leather portfolio hit the bench with deliberate weight, a physical manifestation of influence intended to remind everyone present of the forces at play. Catherine leaned back in her chair, arms crossed elegantly, her diamond bracelet glinting as she exchanged a knowing glance with her attorney, their shared smile suggesting this was merely an inconvenient formality before inevitable victory. "My client's family has contributed millions to this city," the attorney continued, gesturing toward Catherine as though presenting royalty, his finger stabbing the air with each emphasized syllable. "The Wellington Foundation funds 3 community centers, sponsors scholarship programs, and employs hundreds of Rhode Island residents. Surely this court recognizes the broader context of who stands before you today. His implication hung in the air like smoke, unsubtle yet calculated, suggesting that ordinary rules bent differently for extraordinary people. Catherine nodded approvingly, her posture radiating entitled certainty that justice could be negotiated. Like any other transaction, Judge Caprio studied the documents with methodical patience, his face an unreadable mask of judicial composure, turning each page with the same careful attention he'd give any case. The courtroom held its collective breath, waiting. Judge Caprio set the documents aside, his weathered hands moving with quiet dignity as he folded them carefully atop the leather portfolio, creating distance between himself and the attorney's implied promises. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as he leaned forward, his eyes carrying the weight of decades spent weighing truth against power, his voice emerging steady and warm like a compass, finding true north. "Counselor, before I address your motion, let me tell you about my father," he began, his words cutting through the courtroom's tension like a church bell on a silent morning. The attorney's confident smile flickered momentarily, uncertainty creeping into his posture as the judge's tone suggested this wouldn't follow the script they'd anticipated. Antonio Caprio stepped off a ship at Ellis Island with $8 in his pocket and hope bigger than any fortune. The judge continued, his voice thickening with emotion that decades couldn't diminish, his gaze drifting past Catherine towards something distant and sacred. He couldn't speak English, had no connections, no prestigious surname to open. Doors, just calloused hands, and an immigrant's dream that America meant something different than the old world he'd fled. The courtroom stilled completely, even Catherine's practiced composure wavering, as she straightened unconsciously, sensing the ground shifting beneath her assumptions. He taught me that this nation's promise wasn't comfort for the powerful. It was justice for everyone, delivered equally regardless of the weight of your wallet or the prominence of your name. Judge Caprio's expression hardened like marble as he lifted the first citation, his reading glasses catching the overhead lights, while Catherine shifted in her designer heels, her diamond bracelet catching fluorescent gleams as irritation flickered across her carefully maintained features. "Mrs. Harrison, these violations weren't accidental oversights. They demonstrate a pattern of deliberate disregard," he stated, his voice carrying the weight of mountains as he aligned the documents before him with surgical precision. The courtroom's atmosphere thickened, spectators leaning forward unconsciously as the judge's finger traced the printed addresses, each one identical, each one telling a story Catherine clearly wished would remain untold. Her attorney placed a cautionary hand on her forearm, but she brushed it away with visible annoyance, her jaw tightening as her privilege began feeling less like armor and more like chains. This particular violation occurred outside the Providence Veterans Medical Center, Judge Caprio continued, his words dropping like stones into still water, each ripple reaching further than the last. "Your Mercedes was parked illegally in a designated accessible space for 3 hours on a Tuesday morning, blocking access to those who sacrificed everything for the freedoms you so casually exercise." Catherine's perfectly painted lips parted to object, but something in the judge's unwavering gaze silenced her before sound could form, her confidence crumbling like sandcastles against an incoming tide. The gallery watched her composure fracture in real time, her shoulders stiffening defensively as she realized her name carried no currency here, no magic capable of erasing consequences or rewriting justice into convenience. Judge Caprio's voice softened with deliberate reverence as he lifted his gaze toward the back of the courtroom, where afternoon light filtered through tall windows onto a figure Catherine had barely noticed. "Mr. Robert Chen, would you please stand for the court?" he requested, his words carrying the gentle authority of someone honoring sacred ground rather than commanding obedience. The wheelchair's metallic whisper against polished floors cut through the silence like a blade through silk. every eye turning as the elderly veteran maneuvered forward with practiced dignity, his pressed shirt displaying a purple heart that caught the light like a fragment of captured sunset. Catherine's breath audibly caught as reality crashed through her carefully constructed walls, her manicured hand rising involuntarily to her throat, while color drained from her cheeks like water through broken levees. Mr. Chen's weathered face held no anger, only profound sadness as he spoke in measured tones about waiting that morning, his chemotherapy appointment slipping away minute by agonizing minute, because someone's convenience mattered more than his survival. The courtroom held its collective breath as his words painted pictures of pain and frustration, of a man who'd given his youth to his country, now denied basic dignity by someone who'd never sacrificed anything beyond designer preferences. The veteran's hands trembled slightly on his wheelchair armrests, decades of service visible in every scar and line, while Catherine sat frozen like expensive sculpture. Suddenly recognizing its own emptiness, Judge Caprio allowed the moment to breathe, to expand, until every person present understood they weren't witnessing legal proceedings, but fundamental questions about who Americans truly are when nobody's watching. Judge Caprio's hand moved with ceremonial gravity as he lifted a manila folder, its edges worn, from handling, while his eyes held Catherine's with the unflinching steadiness of truth confronting illusion. Mrs. Vandermeer, this folder contains documentation of 7 previous parking violations in this exact location over the past 18 months, he announced, each word dropping like stones into still water, creating ripples that reached every corner of the hushed courtroom. Her attorney shifted uncomfortably, his expensive briefcase suddenly seeming like inadequate armor, while Catherine's confident smile fractured into something brittle and desperate. The judge's fingers traced the documented pattern of her entitled dismissals, each incident where she'd invoked family, connections like medieval nobility claiming divine right. 7 times you parked illegally in designated accessible spaces, the judge continued, his voice carrying disappointment that cut deeper than anger ever could, and 7 times you refused payment, instead demanding that citations be dismissed because of who you believe yourself to be. Catherine's hands clenched in her lap, knuckles whitening against designer fabric, as courthouse cameras captured the precise moment privilege met consequence. Her face flushed crimson as he read excerpts from her own written responses, dripping with contempt for ordinary citizens and their petty regulations. The courtroom atmosphere thickened, with collective recognition that they were witnessing accountability's rarest flower blooming in democracy's garden. Judge Caprio rose from his bench with the deliberate power of a monument coming to life, his robes flowing like the folds of justice herself, taking human form. In 1776, our founders declared a revolutionary truth that shook the foundations of the old world, he began, his voice resonating through the chamber with the weight of sacred conviction. They proclaimed that all are created equal, endowed with unalienable rights that no title, no fortune, no family name could diminish or enhance. His words hung in the air like cathedral bells, each syllable a hammer striking against the chains of inherited privilege. Catherine's carefully constructed facade crumbled like ancient parchment exposed to flame, her eyes darting between the judge and the crowded gallery bearing witness to her reckoning. This constitution that governs us recognizes no dukes, no lords, no royalty of blood or bank accounts. Judge Caprio continued, his finger tapping the founding document resting on his desk. The only aristocracy we honor here is the aristocracy of character, of citizenship, of conscience, lived with dignity and respect for fellow Americans. His immigrant father's weathered face seemed to materialize in his passionate delivery, generations of struggle distilled into this singular moment. The courtroom walls themselves seemed to lean inward, history pressing close to witness, justice's unflinching gaze meeting entitlement's hollow arrogance. Your family name means nothing in this temple of law, the judge declared, each word a brick in democracy's eternal foundation. Judge Caprio's hands came to rest on the sentencing document, his fingers spreading across the page like roots claiming sacred ground. Catherine Elizabeth Thornhill, this court hereby imposes the maximum penalties permitted under municipal law, he announced, his voice carrying the unyielding strength of bedrock beneath a nation's foundations. The gavel rose, slowly, deliberately, giving weight to the gravity of this moment where privilege would finally bow before principle. You are fined $15,000 to be paid in full within 30 days, with no extensions granted regardless of appeal. The defendant's porcelain composure shattered like crystal meeting marble, her mouth opening, wordlessly, as her attorney gripped her trembling shoulder. Furthermore, you will complete 200 hours of community service at the Providence Veterans Medical Center, where you will witness firsthand the sacrifices made by those you so carelessly inconvenienced, Judge Caprio continued, each sentence landing with surgical precision. Catherine's designer handbag slipped from her lap, hitting the floor with a sound that echoed through the silent chamber like a crown falling from an unworthy head. Her perfectly manicured fingers clutched the defendant's table, knuckles whitening as reality's cold hand gripped her throat. You will also complete a mandatory driver responsibility education course and submit written apologies to each veteran affected by your violations, the judge added, his eyes never leaving her crumbling form. The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause, quickly silenced by the bailiff, as Catherine sat frozen in disbelief. Her 7 previous dismissals had taught her that consequences were, for ordinary people, that her surname was an invisible shield against accountability's reach. That illusion now lay shattered at her feet. 3 weeks after the gavel's thunder echoed through that Providence courtroom, security cameras at the Veterans Medical Center captured Catherine Elizabeth Thornhill pushing a wheelchair through sunlit corridors. Her designer clothes replaced by simple volunteer scrubs. Her hands, once waving dismissively at citations, now steadied the trembling fingers of a 92-year-old Korean War veteran as he recounted stories of Chosin Reservoir's frozen hell. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Her first days revealed a woman confronting the hollow architecture of her privileged existence. But something profound shifted when she met the disabled veteran she had wronged, and he offered forgiveness she hadn't earned. The courtroom footage spread across continents like wildfire through dry timber, translated into 47 languages, viewed by hundreds of millions who hungered for proof that justice could still triumph over entitlement. Judge Frank Caprio became an unlikely global symbol, his weathered face representing the promise that America, despite its struggles and contradictions, still possessed leaders who remembered that the law's majesty rests not in protecting the powerful, but in defending the powerless. Letters arrived daily from every corner of the earth, from farmers in Ghana to teachers in Japan, all sharing the same message, that his courtroom had restored their faith in the possibility of true equality. Catherine completed her 200 hours and voluntarily added 200 more, finding purpose in service that wealth had never provided. She established a foundation funding transportation for disabled veterans, turning her shame into something resembling redemption. Judge Caprio never sought recognition for the verdict that changed her life, continuing his work with the same humble dignity his immigrant father had modeled, proving that America's greatest strength flows not from its monuments or military might, but from ordinary leaders who refuse to bend justice toward power. The disabled veteran who missed his appointment that fateful day stood at the foundation's opening ceremony, his purple heart gleaming beneath the lights, and shook Catherine's hand with genuine warmth. Judge Caprio watched from the audience, his presence unremarked, but essential, a quiet guardian of the principles that transform nations from collections of people into communities bound by shared ideals. His legacy wasn't carved in marble, but written in transformed lives, in courtrooms where character outranked credentials, in the renewed belief that America could still be the place where justice wore no price tag and bowed to no surname. The gavel's echo had become a bell of freedom, ringing across a world desperate to hear it. What moment of true justice have you witnessed that restored your faith in fairness? Subscribe to witness more stories where courage confronts privilege and principles triumph over power.